What happens when a powerful senator walks into a courtroom, convinced the law is just another room he owns, only to discover, live on television, that the quiet judge in front of him has been waiting for the truth to catch up. Drop a comment telling us the moment you knew this senator had already lost, because what unfolded inside Providence Municipal Court that Tuesday morning would leave the gallery speechless, the cameras frozen on one face, and millions of viewers with a clip they would never forget. At exactly 9:07 a.m. on October 14, 2025, the polished brass doors of Courtroom 3 swung open with the kind of force that turns heads before a single word is spoken. The room itself was warm from the old radiators under the windows, and the faint smell of coffee from the hallway still lingered in the air. Judge Frank Caprio, 78 years old, sat at the bench in his usual dark navy robe, thin reading glasses balanced low on his nose, a yellow legal pad to his left, and a fountain pen aligned neatly beside it like ritual. The courtroom cameras were already live. The red tally light blinked. Somewhere out there, thousands were watching in real time, and by the end of the day, millions would be. Then Senator Dean Whitmore entered. He was 54, broad-shouldered, silver at the temples, and dressed like a man who had spent the last decade making sure every room understood his price before he ever said his name. Charcoal Brioni suit, burgundy Hermes tie, black Ferragamo loafers polished so sharply they caught the overhead light. He wore the expression some powerful men mistake for confidence and others recognize immediately as contempt. Behind him came his chief of staff, Miranda Voss, carrying a leather document case, and two security aides who had no reason to be in municipal court except to remind the room who he believed he was. Like this video, if you believe the truth always sounds different when power is forced to answer questions. The clerk, Elena Mendez, 42, precise and unshakable in a cream blouse and black blazer, looked down at the docket and announced the case number in a steady voice. Case 25 MC 4418, State of Rhode Island versus Dean Whitmore. Citation, appeal, and motion regarding obstruction, intimidation, and interference connected to municipal proceedings. A murmur rippled through the back benches. People had shown up that morning expecting another small civic drama. A parking citation, maybe some procedural posturing, one more public official insisting the rules were for everybody except him. But anyone paying close attention noticed the second part of Elena's statement: obstruction, intimidation, interference. Those were not normal words for a senator contesting a $95 citation. Caprio lifted his eyes, calm, dry, patient. "Good morning, Senator." Whitmore didn't say good morning back. He placed both hands on the defense table and leaned forward just enough for the cameras to catch the move. "With respect, Your Honor, I'm here because this entire matter is beneath the dignity of my office and frankly beneath the dignity of this court." You could hear the room inhale. Not loudly, not dramatically, just that collective intake that happens when everyone realizes somebody has made a terrible mistake in public and doesn't know it yet. Hit that subscribe button if you've ever watched someone mistake calm for weakness. Judge Caprio didn't flinch. He had heard every tone a defendant could bring into a courtroom: fear, defensiveness, shame, anger, arrogance disguised as charm, real charm hiding real pain. This one was cleaner than most, cold, rehearsed, and wrapped in the assumption of immunity. "Then perhaps," Caprio said, folding his hands, "you should help us understand why your office made 9 calls to the clerk's chamber over a parking citation." That was the first shift. Whitmore's jaw tightened just once. Miranda Voss turned slightly toward him, not enough for viewers to notice on a first watch, but enough to suggest she had not expected the judge to open there. The issue, at least on paper, was small. On September 29, a black 2024 Cadillac Escalade registered to a campaign entity connected to Senator Whitmore had been ticketed outside the Kent County Family Resource Center on Broad Street. It was stopped in a clearly marked access lane reserved for emergency transport and wheelchair drop-off. The ticketing officer, a Providence parking enforcement supervisor named Malik Harper, had body cam footage showing the vehicle idling there for 17 minutes with a security detail waving off a transport van carrying a disabled child. On its own, that would have been embarrassing, but not explosive. The problem was what happened next. 3 hours after the citation, the office of Senator Dean Whitmore began calling municipal staff. Then came 2 messages to the deputy administrator. Then an email marked urgent, requesting administrative correction. Then another, less polite. Then AC. According to the internal log, a private number linked to Whitmore's chief of staff demanding the footage be reviewed before becoming public spectacle. By the next morning, a junior courthouse assistant had filed a written report saying she felt pressured after being told, in a closed-door hallway conversation, that people who made simple mistakes difficult often found their city budgets reevaluated by the legislature. That assistant was in the courtroom too. Her name was Talia Brooks, 26 years old, first-generation college graduate, brown cardigan, nervous fingers twisting a silver ring. She sat in the second row beside her mother, Denise, who worked nights at Rhode Island Hospital and still had the exhausted posture of someone used to putting other people first. Talia had not expected to become the center of a public confrontation with a sitting senator. She had only filed the report because, as she later wrote, "If I stayed quiet, I'd spend the rest of my life wondering what that silence cost." Share this with someone who needs to see what courage looks like when it doesn't come wrapped in power. Whitmore straightened and smiled, the kind of smile meant for donors and cameras, and people too intimidated to test it. "Your Honor, my office requested a review because my vehicle was present while I was participating in an outreach visit to the Family Resource Center." Caprio glanced at the file. "Your vehicle was present in a lane reserved for medically vulnerable children." "I reject that characterization. Reality does not require your acceptance, Senator." That line landed like a struck match. You could hear it in the gallery, a whisper, then silence, then the little clicking shift of camera equipment as operators instinctively zoomed in. Somewhere in homes and offices and break rooms across the state, people stopped mid-scroll. This was no longer a boring citation hearing. This was a collision. Whitmore pivoted fast. "I'm not going to sit here and allow this court to turn a scheduling misunderstanding into some kind of moral theater." Caprio leaned back slightly. "And I'm not going to allow a public office to lean on court staff and pretend that is routine constituent service." It would have been enough already. For most viral courtroom clips, that exchange alone could carry the entire story. But this was only the opening movement, and Judge Caprio knew something the senator did not. There was another file on the bench. Not in the public docket packet, not yet. At 9:18 a.m., Alina Mendez passed a note up to the bench. Caprio read it. His eyes moved once to the back of the courtroom, then back to the senator. "Before we proceed," he said, "I want to make sure all witnesses connected to the intimidation complaint are present." Whitmore frowned. "Witnesses." Alina consulted the list. "Officer Malik Harper is present. Ms. Talia Brooks is present. Mr. Raymond Doyle is present." That name meant nothing to most people in the room. Yet, but Miranda Voss looked sharply to her left, and for the first time, Whitmore lost control of his expression. That single flicker, the half-second of confusion turning to alarm, would later be replayed everywhere. Slow motion, freeze frame, captioned with 1,000 variations of the same thought. He didn't expect that name. Drop a comment telling us, if you noticed the exact second the senator realized this wasn't a routine hearing. Raymond Doyle stood from the back row. 63. Narrow frame, weathered face, raincoat still damp from the October drizzle outside. He wasn't polished like the people who usually moved near power. He looked like the kind of man no one notices until he decides not to be invisible anymore. And that mattered, because Raymond Doyle had been a driver for the Rhode Island Senate Motor Pool for 21 years. He had transported governors, legislators, donors, visiting officials, and one ambitious senator whose reputation for temper was whispered through staff hallways like weather warnings. Doyle had retired 11 months earlier after a minor stroke and now spent most mornings helping his daughter with her bakery in Cranston. He had not intended to appear in court. He had not wanted cameras. But 3 days earlier, after seeing a partial media report about Whitmore calling the citation a clerical misunderstanding, Doyle contacted a producer at Channel 8 News and then the court administrator. He said he had information. Not about the ticket. About the pattern. Judge Caprio addressed him gently. "Mr. Doyle, are you prepared to testify if needed?" Doyle nodded once. "Yes, Your Honor." Whitmore's attorney finally rose. His name was Preston Kearns, a tall, smooth defense lawyer with cufflinks shaped like scales of justice, which somehow made him less convincing rather than more. He adjusted his jacket and spoke in that polished tone expensive counsel use when they want a room to forget the facts and admire the packaging. "Your Honor, with resp. Any attempt to introduce prior accusations unrelated to the citation itself would be prejudicial and beyond scope." Caprio looked at him over his glasses. "If the scope includes whether your client used public office to pressure court personnel and suppress evidence, then a pattern of similar conduct is not beyond scope. It is the scope." Again the room shifted. Again Whitmore smiled like someone trying to hold a door shut against a flood. What no one outside the inner circle knew was that the senator had spent the previous 48 hours making phone calls of his own. He had contacted a local columnist. He had floated the idea that Judge Caprio was playing to cameras and had lost his touch. He had told one donor at a dinner in Newport that if this hearing went badly, he would drag the old man through every ethics committee in the state. He believed he could overwhelm the story before the story overwhelmed him. But there is a point in every public reckoning where influence stops traveling outward and begins collapsing inward. At 9:26 a.m., Caprio called Officer Malik Harper. Harper stepped forward in uniform, tall, composed, body cam clipped at his chest. 37 years old, former Army medic, married father of 2. He had the kind of steady face people trust immediately because it seems incapable of performance. He described responding to a complaint that an access lane was blocked outside the Family Resource Center. He arrived at 2:14 p.m. on September 29 and observed the Escalade engine running, hazards on, security personnel positioned near the curb. "Did you speak with anyone connected to the vehicle?" Caprio asked. "Yes, Your Honor. I spoke with a man later identified as Senate Security Liaison Brent Haskell." "And what did he say?" Harper didn't rush. He said, quote, "The senator will be 2 more minutes. You can move along." "Did you move along?" "No, sir." A few people smiled. Harper continued. A wheelchair transport van arrived at 2:19 p.m. carrying 8-year-old Sophia Marquez, who had muscular dystrophy and was being brought for a respiratory support appointment. Because the lane was blocked, the van had to stop farther down in a loading zone where the ramp deployment was unstable. Sophia's mother, Elena Marquez, later filed a written complaint stating the maneuver caused Sophia's chair to jolt sideways, striking her left arm against the interior restraint bar. The bruise was photographed. The incident report was time-stamped. The driver's statement matched. Whitmore's face remained still. Too still. Like this video, if you believe the smallest abuse of power, often hurts the people already carrying the heaviest burdens. Then Caprio asked the question that changed the atmosphere from political scandal to moral indictment. Officer Harper, when you began writing the citation, did anyone invoke the senator's office? Yes, Your Honor. Who? Mr. Haskell said, do you know whose car that is? I told him it didn't matter. The gallery murmured again. Whitmore snapped, this is absurd. Security staff say things in tense situations. Caprio raised one hand without looking at him. You will have your turn. Harper continued. At 2:31 p.m. after the citation was placed, Whitmore himself exited the center. He appeared agitated. He asked why the officer was making a show out of parking logistics. Harper responded that the lane was restricted. Whitmore then said, according to Harper's written report and body cam audio, I hope you enjoy explaining this to people who control your department's funding. The courtroom went still. Not murmurs now, not whispers. Still, because those words are different when spoken aloud. On paper, they sound like an allegation. In a courtroom under oath with cameras rolling, they become weight. Whitmore laughed once, but the sound had no warmth. That's not what I said. Caprio made a note. We'll come to the footage. There it was. The first cliff edge. Everyone in that room suddenly understood footage existed. Not rumor, not recollection, not partisan spin, footage. And if the senator was lying, every second from here forward would make the lie more expensive. Hit that subscribe button if you already know the camera catches what arrogance always forgets. Preston Kearns objected to the release of body cam audio before foundation had been fully argued, but the objection felt thin even before Caprio denied it. Alina dimmed the side monitor. The technician loaded the clip. A soft electronic hum filled the room. You could hear someone in the gallery clear their throat, then stop midway as if afraid to interrupt history. The video quality was the usual municipal body cam grain, wet pavement, yellow curb markings, a black Escalade with legislative plates. The frame moved as Harper walked toward the driver's side rear quarter panel. Haskell stepped in. Voices overlapped. Hazard lights blinked in orange pulses against the rain-dark street. Then there was Whitmore, exiting the building beneath a blue awning, umbrella held by someone else. Even on video, he moved like a man who believed consequences slow down for him. Harper's voice came through clearly. Sir, this lane is restricted. I've issued a citation. Whitmore replied, You've issued a headache, officer. A few strained laughs from the room, then the key exchange. Harper, the lane was blocked during medical transport. Whitmore, then write your ticket and stop performing for the sidewalk. Harper, please lower your voice. Whitmore, I hope you enjoy explaining this to people who control your department's funding. Not identical in cadence to Harper's testimony, but close enough to erase any serious doubt. The courtroom reacted the way people do when truth arrives faster than their minds can organize it. A woman near the back whispered, "Oh my God." Someone else muttered, "He said it." Talia Brooks put her hand over her mouth. Denise Brooks started crying silently. And Whitmore. He did something fatal. He rolled his eyes. That tiny gesture, so practiced and dismissive, would infuriate viewers far more than shouting would have, because it said what so many ordinary people fear powerful men believe. Even when caught, they think evidence is just another inconvenience. Caprio let the silence stretch. Then he said very softly, "Senator, threats sound different when they're played back." That was another quote people would share for weeks. But the hearing still was not finished. In fact, it was about to become something far bigger than a parking citation or even an intimidation complaint. Because when Caprio called Talia Brooks, the human cost of the story entered the room in full. She walked to the witness stand with the stiffness of someone holding herself together by deliberate force. She had graduated from Rhode Island College at 22, taken a clerkship assistant role 2 years later, and spent her weekends caring for her younger brother Marcus, who lived with epilepsy. She was not political. She had voted in every election since she turned 18, but she did not donate, campaign, or attend rallies. She believed rules mattered because, in her life, rules were often the only protection people without money ever had. She testified that on September 30, shortly after 10:00 a.m., she was asked by a supervisor to retrieve internal call logs relating to the Whitmore citation. While in the hallway outside records, Miranda Voss approached her and asked whether certain footage had already been flagged for internal review. Talia said she didn't know. Miranda then asked whether public release could be delayed until leadership had a chance to resolve a misunderstanding. Did she identify which leadership? Caprio asked. She said the senator's office. Did the conversation end there? Talia swallowed. No, Your Honor. She described how Miranda lowered her voice and said it would be unfortunate if a junior staffer got crosswise with people making appropriations decisions. Talia testified she felt immediate panic. Her younger brother's medication had recently changed. Her mother's overtime had been cut. She could not afford to lose her job. She returned to her desk shaking and eventually told Deputy Administrator Paul Renner what had happened. Renner instructed her to write the interaction down while it was fresh. Whitmore interjected, "My chief of staff never threatened anyone." Miranda finally stood. "I absolutely did not." Caprio turned to them both with the same expression he might have used addressing children during a school tour. "Then, I assume you will welcome the corroborating evidence." Miranda stopped breathing for half a beat. Because yes, there was more. There is always a moment in viral courtroom stories when viewers think they understand the scale of the drama, only to learn they've been looking at the smaller door inside the larger one. This was that moment. Caprio asked Alina to mark Exhibit 6. It was not video. It was a call log and transcript summary created by the court's internal systems team after concerns were raised about unusual contact volume. Municipal administrative lines, like many public offices, recorded metadata. Some lines recorded audio by policy when staff toggled a preservation setting after concerns of harassment. On September 30, after the second call from Whitmore's office, that setting had been activated. One of the calls had been preserved. The recording was only 92 seconds long. It sounded worse than anyone expected. Miranda's voice was controlled, almost friendly, which somehow made it colder. She asked whether the footage could be held. She emphasized the senator's valuable partnership with city funding initiatives. Then, with the practiced softness of someone used to delivering threats as opportunities, she said, "I'd hate for someone early in her career to be associated with making a simple issue unnecessarily painful. Not a direct firing threat, not enough to impress people used to explicit criminal language. But everyone in that courtroom knew exactly what it was. Everyone in the room knew because most of them had heard versions of it before, in offices, in contracts, in donor dinners, in conversations where nobody uses the word punish because the civilized form of intimidation is suggestion. Share this with someone who knows power rarely announces itself by shouting first. Miranda Voss looked stricken now, but not ashamed, stricken the way people look when they suddenly realize their private manner has wandered onto a public stage. Whitmore leaned toward Kearns and hissed something. Kearns asked for a recess. Caprio denied it. "No, counsel. We are not pausing the truth because it has become inconvenient." That quote would make headlines by noon. And then came the revelation that changed everything. Judge Caprio asked if Raymond Doyle had ever heard similar language from the senator or his office. Kearns objected again. Caprio overruled. Doyle took the stand. He gripped the rail with both hands and spoke plainly. No polish, no flourishes, just memory. He said that in March 2024, he drove Whitmore from a fundraiser at the Bellevue Avenue mansion of developer Carl Wexler back to Providence. During the ride, Whitmore took a call regarding a zoning dispute involving a neighborhood legal clinic on Elmwood Avenue. Doyle heard the senator say, "If they want funding in this district, they'll stop embarrassing our people in hearings." 2 days later, Doyle claimed, a city attorney he knew mentioned that pressure had come down from the State House side to delay permit approvals affecting the clinic. That alone was troubling. Then Doyle added something else. On the day of the Resource Center citation, he had been at the bakery with his daughter when he recognized Whitmore's escalade on the local news teaser. He called a former Senate motor pool colleague, who told him Whitmore had spent the previous week fuming about a televised traffic court segment involving another public figure, and had vowed no judge was going to build a clip off me. Caprio's pen stopped moving. "Repeat that." Doyle did. "No judge was going to build a clip off me." That line explained everything. Whitmore hadn't simply wanted the ticket erased. He wanted the optics controlled. He feared humiliation more than accountability. In his mind, the court was not a place of law. It was a platform to dominate or neutralize. He had walked in prepared to intimidate the judge before the judge could expose him. And now everyone watching understood the title of the story, long before the internet would write it. Whitmore's arrogance was not accidental, it was strategic. He believed spectacle belonged to him. He was wrong. Like this video, if you believe the moment someone tries to bully the court, they've already told you exactly who they are. By 10:11 a.m., the hearing had become the most watched live segment on regional television. Producers were clipping it in real time. Social media accounts were already uploading fragments with captions like "This just happened" and "Senator melts down in Caprio court." But inside Courtroom 3, none of that noise mattered yet. What mattered was what came next. Because Judge Caprio had heard enough to embarrass a man, he had not yet heard enough to judge one fully. And that distinction is what separated him from everyone else in the room. He turned to Whitmore. "Senator, you may speak." This was the choice moment, the one that arrives for every person cornered by evidence. Deny and sink deeper. Deflect and look smaller. Or tell the truth and risk becoming human. Whitmore chose denial. "I have spent 20 years in public service," he said, voice sharpened by wounded ego. "I have supported hospitals, schools, small business grants, opioid recovery funding. And now I'm supposed to stand here while an aging television judge and a handful of disgruntled employees turn a scheduling issue into a morality play." The word aging hit the room like a slap. Even Kearns looked pained. Caprio said nothing for 3 full seconds. Then he asked, "Do you believe my age prevents me from hearing the audio we all just heard?" Whitmore opened his mouth, closed it. Caprio continued, "Or are you suggesting wisdom becomes invalid when it refuses to flatter power?" A low murmur, then silence. Whitmore did what arrogant people often do when their main strategy fails. He escalated. "Yes," he said, "I'm suggesting this court enjoys humiliating people. I'm suggesting you saw a chance to turn me into a headline." And there it was, the pure projection at the heart of it. He could not imagine accountability except as performance because performance was how he lived. He accused the court of spectacle because he understood no other language. Judge Caprio nodded slowly, almost sadly. "No, Senator. You turned yourself into a headline the moment a child in a wheelchair had to be unloaded in traffic so your vehicle could wait in comfort." That sentence broke something in the room. Not loudly, not visually, but morally. Because until then, this had still been, in some people's minds, a power struggle. A politician versus a judge. Ego versus ego. But Caprio had just placed the forgotten center back where it belonged. A child named Sophia Marquez whose body took the jolt so a senator's schedule wouldn't. And when Sophia's mother stood in the back, not called yet, simply unable to remain seated, every camera turned. Alina Marquez was 34, hair pinned back in a rushed knot, wearing navy scrubs beneath a raincoat. She had come straight from an overnight shift at a nursing home. Her daughter Sophia sat beside an aunt, tiny in a pink adaptive jacket, dark curls gathered with a glitter clip, legs covered by a fleece blanket patterned with stars. She had not been expected to speak, but the look on her face when Whitmore called it a scheduling issue was enough to turn a courtroom clip into something deeper. Caprio noticed immediately. "Ms. Marquez, would you like to be heard?" She hesitated, then nodded. What happened next would become the emotional peak that transformed outrage into heartbreak. Alina approached the stand and kept one hand on Sophia's wheelchair until the last possible second, as if separation itself required effort. Her voice was not polished. It broke twice in the first minute. But broken voices often carry farther than perfect ones because nobody mistakes them for performance. She described the day of the appointment. Sophia had been struggling with shallow breathing all week after a viral infection. The resource center coordinated specialized pediatric therapy. The access lane mattered because unloading her chair required angle, time, and stability. When the van couldn't reach the curb, the driver improvised. The ramp shifted. Sophia's left arm hit metal. She cried the entire way inside. "She doesn't cry much," Alina said, wiping her face. "She's tougher than me. She usually tells me, 'Mom, I'm okay.' But that day she kept saying, 'Why are we in the road?' No one moved. No one even coughed." Alina continued. She had no idea whose vehicle blocked the lane at first. She just knew a suited man with an earpiece waved impatiently while her daughter was being lowered onto wet pavement. Later, she learned the car belonged to a senator who had since called it a misunderstanding. "It was not a misunderstanding to us," she said. "It was another day somebody important decided our emergency was less important than their convenience." That line spread almost as fast as Caprio's. Not a misunderstanding, a decision. Whitmore looked down for the first time all morning. "Not long. Just enough. Drop a comment telling us whether accountability begins the moment excuses stop working." Caprio thanked Alina and did not rush her off the stand. He let her return to Sophia in silence, which was wiser than anything he could have said. The silence itself testified. Viewers could hear the faint squeak of the wheelchair turning, the soft rustle of coat fabric, someone in the back openly crying now. Then came the "but wait, there's more" twist. Deputy Administrator Paul Renner, who had been sitting near the side wall, requested permission to address the court. Caprio granted it. Renner was 58, meticulous, known in city circles for never freelancing and never dramatizing. If he stood up, people listened. He testified that after Talia Brooks filed her report, he ordered an internal preservation of call records, emails, and hallway camera feeds. One of those hallway cameras, mounted near records, captured the conversation between Talia and Miranda. There was no audio, but the footage showed Miranda stepping close, Talia backing against the wall, Miranda pointing toward the records office, then smiling and touching Talia's shoulder before leaving. Talia remained motionless for several seconds afterward, then sat down on a hallway bench and put her head in her hands. The footage was not decisive by itself, but in context it was devastating, because intimidation is often visible before it is fully audible. Miranda's hands began to tremble. Whitmore leaned in again, voice low, furious. "Don't say anything." That would have passed unnoticed if not for the courtroom microphone at counsel table, which picked up just enough for the room to hear. And the room heard. Caprio's eyes lifted. "Counsel, instruct your client that witness management is not permitted in this courtroom." Whitmore snapped, "This is unbelievable." "No," Caprio replied, "it is on the record." Another shareable quote, another clip, another wound self-inflicted. By now, outrage had turned to a different emotion among viewers, disbelief. How could a man sitting in front of proof still think pressure would help? The answer was uncomfortable, because habits built in private often survive long past their usefulness. Whitmore had likely gotten away with this tone for years. Stop. FF absorbed it. Contractors worked around it. Lesser officials deferred. That is how abuse of power grows, not by one spectacular act but by 1,000 smaller moments no one stops. Judge Caprio understood that better than anyone. And yet, what he did next shocked even people who admired him. He softened. "Senator Whitmore," he said, and for the first time there was no edge in his voice, "I have seen frightened defendants lie. I have seen proud defendants lie. I have seen poor defendants lie because they are ashamed, and rich defendants lie because they are accustomed to insulation. But I am going to ask you one question, human being to human being." The whole room leaned in. Is there any part of you that understands what that mother just said? Whitmore stared at him. There it was, the second choice. This one deeper. Not legal, moral. And for one brief second, one blink, one breath, one tightening of the throat, it looked like Dean Whitmore might finally step toward truth. Instead he said, "I understand political theater when I see it." The disappointment in the room was almost physical. You could feel it. The kind that arrives not when someone reveals they are cruel, but when they are offered a bridge and choose the cliff. Caprio nodded once, very well. That was when he opened the second file. The file Whitmore had not seen. The one that would bring the entire hearing to a level no one anticipated. Inside was a packet delivered at 8:41 a.m. that morning by investigative producer Lyon Porter of Channel 8, accompanied by an affidavit and chain of custody declaration. Porter had received it anonymously overnight. It contained internal emails from Whitmore's office and one text screenshot from a staff chat. Preston Kearns was on his feet immediately. "Your Honor, if this is media-sourced material, authenticity must be challenged before any mention." "Correct," Caprio said, "which is why I have not admitted it yet. But since your client has made credibility the center of his defense, I am entitled to inquire whether he disputes authorship." He read the subject line from one email. "Need this buried before Caprio Circus." The room exploded in whispers. Whitmore's face went pale in real time. Miranda sat down slowly, like her knees had ceased negotiating with gravity. Caprio continued. "Sent September 30, 11:12 a.m. from an address associated with Senior Staff Operations, copied to Ms. Voss. Message body references the body cam, the clerk's office, and quote, 'No clip, no hearing. Handle records quietly.' Senator, do you dispute that this email concerns this matter?" Whitmore's lips parted, but nothing came out. And just like that, the ultimate confrontation began. Like this video, if you believe the truth gets loudest right after someone tries to bury it. Kearns asked for an immediate continuance, denied. He asked for sealing, denied pending authenticity challenge. He asked to approach, granted briefly. What viewers at home saw then was something better than any scripted drama, panic trying to reorganize itself into strategy. Whitmore and Kearns whispered intensely. Miranda looked straight ahead, no longer able to perform calm. In the gallery, Alina Marquez held Sophia's hand. Talia Brooks stared at the floor, maybe realizing for the first time that what frightened her in a hallway had roots much higher than she imagined. Caprio asked a simple question. "Senator, did you or your office seek to prevent this matter from being seen publicly?" Whitmore finally answered, "I wanted false impressions corrected." By suppressing footage. By preventing misrepresentation. Is an accurate video a misrepresentation? No answer. Caprio lowered the email packet. Power often mistakes delay for innocence. They are not the same. That quote would be quoted by law professors, journalists, and people who just wanted one perfect sentence for why the hearing mattered. Then the breaking point arrived, not for the senator, but for someone no one had been watching closely enough. Miranda Voss began to cry. Not movie tears, not sudden sobbing. Just the unmistakable collapse of a person who has spent years converting conscience into efficiency and has discovered, too late, that the bill eventually comes due. She stood without permission. "I need to say something." Kieran snapped, "Don't." Whitmore hissed, "Sit down." But Miranda didn't sit down. She turned toward the bench and spoke with the raw, unsteady honesty that only appears after the machinery of self-protection burns out. "I made the calls," she said. "I made the second and third calls. I sent the language about handling it quietly. But I need the record to show I did that because he wanted this gone before it went on air." The room detonated. Gasps, audible gasps. Someone actually stood up. A deputy near the wall put a hand up for quiet. Sophia looked around, startled by the sudden sound. Elena pulled her closer. Talia Brooks began crying too, relief and fear colliding at Ankh. "Lee." Whitmore went white, then red. "That is a lie." Miranda turned on him with tears running down both cheeks. "No, Dean. The lie is what you've asked everyone else to live inside." People would replay that line for months. She kept going. She said Whitmore dictated the phrase, "no clip, no hearing." He told her Judge Caprio thrives on moral ambush and needed to be denied the footage. He instructed staff to lean on the budget angle without saying budget. He asked whether the family involved could be identified and managed. Miranda testified she refused that last request, and that was when Whitmore began blaming her for the escalating situation. Every word deepened the crater. Kieran's looked like a man trying to hold back ocean water with stationery. Caprio asked Miranda whether she was testifying voluntarily. She said yes. He asked whether anyone had promised immunity. She said no. He asked whether she understood the consequences of false statements. She said, "I do. That's why I'm done lying." Whitmore slammed one hand on the table. "You ungrateful." "Senator," Caprio's voice cracked like a gavel before the gavel ever moved. "One more outburst and I will have you removed." For the first time all morning, Dean Whitmore looked smaller than the furniture around him. This is where most stories would end. Powerful man exposed, staffer flips, judge delivers moral speech, internet celebrates, credits roll. But life is rarely so clean, and the best courtroom stories earn their ending by complicating it. Because just when viewers thought they had reached the summit, the unexpected twist arrived around the point where everyone least expected mercy to enter the room. Miranda Voss asked to address Talia Brooks directly. Kieran's objected. Caprio considered, then allowed it under strict control. Miranda turned, hands shaking. "Ms. Brooks, I am sorry. I knew exactly what I was doing in that hallway. I told myself it was just pressure, not a threat. I told myself that's how this world works. You looked terrified and I still kept talking. That is on me." Talia cried harder, but she nodded. Then Miranda turned toward Elena Marquez and Sophia. "I am sorry to your daughter too. I never saw her that day. I only saw the problem after. That may be even worse." The room shifted again. This time from anger to something messier. Because accountability is easy to cheer when the villain stays simple. It becomes harder and more honest when one person inside the machine admits she helped it run. Caprio watched all of it without interrupting. He had spent a lifetime understanding a truth many internet audiences forget. Justice is not ruined by complexity. It is revealed by it. Whitmore, however, could not tolerate the loss of control. He stood abruptly. "This is coordinated," he said, voice cracking now. "A political hit, a courtroom ambush. She's saving herself. They're all saving themselves." And then he made the mistake that finished him. He pointed across the courtroom toward Sophia Marquez and said, "That child is being used." If you want to know the precise instant public sympathy dies, It sounds like that sentence. The reaction was immediate and vicious. Outrage surged through the room. Elena Marquez gasped as if struck. A man in the back muttered, "You coward." Even Kearns closed his eyes for a second, perhaps aware that whatever salvage operation remained had just burst into flames. Judge Caprio lifted the gavel once. The crack echoed hard against the wood panels. Enough. He did not raise his voice. He didn't have to. When a person loses the argument, he said, staring directly at Whitmore, he often reaches for the innocent. That is not strength. That is confession. Another line for the ages. Whitmore sank back into his seat, breathing heavily. And then, finally, the moment of realization dialogue shift came, the one the whole story had been building toward. Caprio asked him one last question. "Senator Whitmore, before I rule, I am giving you a final opportunity, not to save your office, not to save your image, to tell the truth. Did you abuse the power entrusted to you?" No one moved. Whitmore's hands, once so steady, were visibly shaking. He looked at Miranda, at Kearns, at the camera monitor, at Alina and Sophia, at Talia Brooks, at the judge. When he spoke, the arrogance was gone. Not all at once, not beautifully, but gone. He swallowed hard. "I thought this would disappear if we got ahead of it." Caprio said nothing. Whitmore continued, voice lower. "I thought if I looked weak on television, it would become the story. I didn't want to be one more clip people laugh at." The irony was unbearable. He went on, "I told myself the Lane issue was small. I told myself the staff contact was standard. I told myself everyone exaggerates these things. But yes," he looked down, "yes, I used my office the way it should not be used." There it was. Not noble, not eloquent, but real enough. And real is what courts deal in. The Rue. Exhaled as one body. Drop a comment telling us whether that confession felt genuine to you or just unavoidable. What followed could have turned punitive and theatrical. Many viewers wanted that. Many still do in stories like this. They want the proud man crushed cleanly. They want humiliation to complete the moral equation. They want the same spectacle he sought, only aimed back at him. Judge Caprio understood the temptation. He refused it. He reviewed the findings methodically. The citation for blocking a restricted access lane was sustained. The intimidation complaint was referred to the State Ethics Commission and Attorney General for review, along with preserved recordings, footage, and testimony. A formal contempt warning would be entered for witness interference during proceedings. The court would recommend protective review for municipal staff contact protocols. On substance alone, that would have been a strong ending. But Caprio added something else. "Senator Whitmore," he said, "the law can fine you, refer you, expose you, even remove you from certain privileges. But none of those things teach as much as honest repair. So I am going to ask something I cannot legally compel, and you are free to refuse." The room leaned in again. "I want you to visit the Family Resource Center. No cameras from your office. No press release. No speech. I want you to meet the families whose access lanes you treat as temporary inconvenience. I want you to spend one full day there listening, not talking, listening." Whitmore blinked, stunned. Caprio turned to Elena Marquez. "Ms. Marquez, that decision is not mine alone. If that request would burden your family, say so, and it ends here." Elena looked at Sophia, then at Whitmore. And this is where the story delivered its forgiveness twist. She said through tears, "I don't want my daughter growing up thinking powerful people can never change. If he comes to listen, really listen, then he should come." It was the last thing anyone expected. And precisely because of that, it hit harder than punishment alone ever could. Whitmore looked as if the floor had shifted under him. Public disgrace, he understood. Fines, referrals, headlines, those he knew how to fight. But mercy, mercy from the people he had wronged, That required a different kind of answer. His voice cracked. "I'll go." Caprio nodded. "Good, because justice without humility becomes revenge, and power without humility becomes rot." One more quote, maybe the best of them all. By the time the hearing adjourned at 11:22 a.m., the clip was already everywhere. News desks called it unprecedented. Commentators called it career-ending. Social feeds called it satisfying, savage, unforgettable. But the most important moments happened after the cameras began widening out and reporters crowded the courthouse steps. Talia Brooks came down the hall with her mother beside her, and Miranda Voss approached cautiously, looking like someone who had aged 5 years in one morning. She asked if she could apologize again privately. Denise Brooks answered before Talia could. "You don't apologize to feel better," Denise said. "You apologize to do better." Miranda nodded. She did not argue. Outside, rain tapped against the granite steps. Microphones jutted forward. Whitmore emerged without the old swagger. No security wall, no smirk. He gave a short statement. He acknowledged wrongdoing. He said he had failed the public standard required of his office. A reporter asked whether he would resign. He said he would cooperate with ethics review and accept the consequences that follow. It wasn't enough for everyone. It wasn't meant to be. But it was more truth than he had offered all morning. And then something strange happened. Judge Caprio did not go outside to claim the moment. He returned to chambers, took off his robe, and asked Alina Mendez whether Sophia had gotten the stuffed toy that sits in the clerk's office for children who come through difficult hearings. Alina said no. Caprio told her to take the blue one, the soft elephant with floppy ears, and give it to her before she left. That tiny detail never made the initial headlines. It surfaced 2 days later in a local reporter's follow-up piece, and viewers loved it because it felt true to the man they had watched. Not performance, habit, kindness as default setting. Like this video, if you believe real strength is quiet after the cameras stop rolling. The ethics story exploded over the next 72 hours. More former staffers contacted journalists. Some described Whitmore as demanding, others as explosive, some as surprisingly generous in private but ruthless when embarrassed. One former intern recalled being told, "Perception is policy." Another said, "He feared ridicule more than failure." That line stuck. It explained so much. Some people are destroyed not by wrongdoing alone but by the terror of appearing weak. So they keep escalating until weakness becomes all anyone can see. 3 weeks later, on November 6, 2025, the State Ethics Commission opened a formal review. 2 days after that, Whitmore stepped down from his leadership post pending investigation. Cable panels circled the clip nightly. Editorials framed the hearing as a case study in public arrogance colliding with ordinary courage. Talia Brooks received letters from court employees across the state thanking her for filing the report. Some included small handwritten notes like, "You spoke for people who freeze in hallways." She kept those notes in a box under her bed. And yes, the clip went viral. Not because a senator lost his temper. Not even because a judge landed perfect one-liners. It went viral because everyone recognized the shape of the story. A powerful person treats inconvenience as entitlement. A vulnerable person pays the price. Lesser officials are asked to smooth it over. Most people go quiet. One person does. Evidence survives. Truth arrives. Then somehow, mercy enters without erasing consequence. That's why millions watched. That's why millions would still be talking about it months later. But the story still had one final turn left. On December 3, 2025, Whitmore kept his promise and went to the Family Resource Center. No cameras from his office. But the center had internal surveillance in the lobby and common areas, and later, with consent from families blurred for privacy, still images from that day were referenced in a local segment. In them, Whitmore looked almost unrecognizable, not physically but emotionally. No designer overcoat, no staff orbit. Just a dark wool peacoat, open collar, legal pad in hand, sitting too straight in a child-sized plastic chair while therapists, parents, drivers, and coordinators explained what access delays actually mean in real life. He listened to a father describe carrying his 12-year-old son in freezing rain because a curb cut was blocked. He listened to a van driver explain that 30 extra seconds can trigger pain episodes during transfers. He listened to Alina Marquez describe planning every route in the city around the hope that strangers will obey signs they barely notice. And at one point, according to Center Director Janice Prout, Sophia wheeled up to him, offered him a crayon drawing of a blue elephant and said, "This is for when you forget again." He cried. No one in the room mocked him. Because when remorse is real, even people you've angered know the difference. Share this with someone who believes accountability matters most when it changes behavior, not just headlines. Now we come to the time jump that validates whether any redemption arc was more than courtroom fog. 8 months later, on August 18, 2026, a handwritten letter arrived at Courtroom 3 addressed to Judge Caprio. The envelope was thick cream stock, no official seal, just a simple return address from Cranston. Alina Mendez opened it in chambers at Caprio's request because his hands had been bothering him that week. Inside was a 4-page letter from Senator Dean Whitmore. Not senator perhaps for much longer. He wrote that the hearing had cost him his leadership role, several donor relationships, and almost certainly his re-election path. He wrote that none of those losses matched the private shame of rewatching the clip and hearing himself speak about a child as if she were a prop. He said the moment he could not escape was not Caprio's rebuke, but Sophia asking in the center lobby whether important people always park where her ramp goes. He wrote that he had entered therapy for anger and control issues in January. He wrote that he had begun attending monthly disability access advisory meetings, without speaking unless asked. He wrote that Miranda Voss had resigned from politics and started consulting for nonprofit governance compliance after entering into cooperation with the Ethics Review. He said, "She did what I lacked the courage to do first. I resented her for it. I now thank her for it." He wrote that he had personally sponsored, with bipartisan support and no media launch, a revised municipal access protection grant aimed at clearer loading zone enforcement around medical facilities and family service centers. And then he wrote the line Caprio underlined twice. "I spent years believing humiliation was the worst thing a public man could endure. I was wrong. Moral blindness is worse because it lets you injure people while still calling yourself good." That line never became a meme. It never trended, but it may have been the truest sentence in the entire saga. Caprio, after listening to Alina finish the letter, sat quietly for a long moment and then said, "That sounds like the first honest speech he has ever given." Later that month, with permission from the parties involved, parts of the letter were summarized in a local broadcast update. People expected victory laps. Instead, they got something rarer, evidence of continuing repair. Talia Brooks had been promoted to records coordinator and had helped design a staff escalation policy for external pressure incidents. Alina Marquez joined an advisory group for medical transport access. Officer Malik Harper received a departmental commendation not for heroics, but for exactly what mattered, staying steady when pressure arrived wearing a title. Miranda Voss, in a short written statement, said, "I learned that professionalism without conscience is just polished harm." And Sophia still kept the blue elephant beside her bed. When Channel 8 interviewed Judge Caprio one final time about the now-famous hearing, the reporter asked him what he remembered most. Was it the confession, the footage, the viral quote, the senator's collapse? Caprio shook his head. "I remember the mother," he said. "Powerful people come and go. The mother came in tired and left carrying the same life she had before, except now the whole state finally saw what her ordinary day requires. That matters. That answer, more than any courtroom line, explained why viewers trusted him. He never centered himself, even when the spotlight begged him to. He understood that justice stories become dangerous when they turn suffering into scenery for somebody else's brand. His job was not to shine brightest. It was to point the light where people usually look away. Hit that subscribe button if you want more stories where quiet truth beats loud power every single time. In the months that followed, students in public policy seminars analyzed the hearing as a case study in institutional ethics. Disability advocates used the clip to push for better municipal enforcement. Court staff associations referenced Talia Brooks in trainings about reporting improper influence. The phrase, "no clip, no hearing," became shorthand for the instinct to bury accountability before it reaches daylight. And Caprio's line, "threats sound different when they're played back," was printed on mugs, T-shirts, and one unforgettable protest sign outside a later State House hearing. But the most meaningful aftermath never trended. It happened in small rooms. A city clerk in another state saving a voicemail instead of deleting it. A junior assistant documenting pressure instead of doubting herself. A parent demanding a blocked access lane be cleared immediately because we all saw what happens when you let it slide. A young law student deciding that public service means protecting the vulnerable before protecting the powerful. That is how real justice stories continue, not through the clip alone, but through the behavior the clip changes. And what of Dean Whitmore? The Ethics Commission eventually censured him formally and imposed penalties tied to misuse of office resources and improper contact. He did not run for re-election. In a final local interview before leaving office, he was asked whether Judge Caprio had embarrassed him. He gave a long pause before answering. "No," he said, "he stopped me from embarrassing myself further." That line surprised people. Some thought it was too neat, too practiced. Maybe it was. Maybe some public instinct never fully leaves a man shaped by cameras and campaigns. But then he added something that felt less polished. "I thought being exposed was the punishment," he said. "It was. The punishment was learning how many people had adjusted themselves around my ego and called that normal." There was the deeper wound. Not the fine, not the censure, not the lost office. The realization that his arrogance had not only hurt strangers, it had trained others to live smaller around him. That is the kind of truth no spin room can soften. And perhaps that is why the story endured. Because beneath the legal details and the viral quotes, it asked a question every viewer recognized in some part of life. What happens when someone used to getting their way finally meets a person who cannot be bought, rushed, charmed, or frightened? Sometimes everything changes. Sometimes a courtroom becomes a mirror. Sometimes the person who enters demanding respect leaves, understanding he has never practiced it. And sometimes the people with the least formal power, a clerk in a hallway, an officer at a curb, a tired mother beside a wheelchair, become the backbone of the entire moral record. That is why this story landed so hard. Not because a senator was exposed on live TV. Because the exposure revealed a whole ecosystem of choices. The blocked lane, the waved-off van, the pressure call, the frightened staffer, the careful judge, the witness who spoke, the mother who refused euphemism, the child who turned inconvenience back into truth with one simple question. Why are we in the road? That question haunts the whole story. Why are people already carrying the hardest burdens, so often the ones asked to absorb one more inconvenience, one more delay, one more entitled decision from someone comfortable enough to call it small? Judge Caprio answered that question the only way he could, not with a speech about himself, not with cruelty, not with vengeance disguised as morality. He answered it by keeping the facts in order, the dignity intact, and the doorway to redemption open without ever weakening consequence. That balance is rare. It is also why the clip will be remembered long after louder scandals are forgotten. Because anyone can punish, anyone can shame, anyone can trend. But it takes a different kind of authority to look directly at arrogance, strip it of costume, protect the wounded, expose the lie, and still leave room for a human being to become better than the version of himself who walked in. That was the real live television moment. Not when Whitmore was caught. Not when the email surfaced. Not even when the room gasped. It was when everyone watching realized the judge was not trying to win a scene. He was trying to rescue the meaning of power itself. Use it to protect. Use it to listen. Use it to steady the room when others try to dominate it. Use it so the child in the wheelchair never has to ask why she's in the road again. And maybe that is the philosophical truth sitting underneath every story like this one. Character is what remains when status stops working. Titles fail. Influence frays. Cameras expose. Excuses collapse. And then, at last, the human being has to stand there without any of it. Who are you then? Dean Whitmore got his answer in public. Frank Caprio gave his in quiet sentences. Talia Brooks gave hers by writing a report while her hands shook. Elena Marquez gave hers by turning pain into testimony. Sophia gave hers with a drawing of a blue elephant and a sentence no one in that room will ever forget. This is why justice stories matter when they are told right. Not because they let us enjoy someone's downfall, but because they remind us what uprightness looks like in ordinary people before the headlines arrive. They remind us that courage is often administrative. That integrity can wear a uniform, a cardigan, hospital scrubs, or a judge's robe. That mercy is strongest when it refuses to lie about harm. And that real exposure is not the destruction of a person. It is the destruction of the false story they were using to live above others. If this story hit you, like this video if you believe no office should ever outrank basic human decency. Drop a comment telling us which moment stayed with you the longest. The body cam playback, Talia's testimony, Alina's words, Miranda's breakdown, or the judge's final challenge. Share this with someone who needs a reminder that accountability and compassion can exist in the same room. And if you want the next story, the one about the mayor who laughed at a janitor's testimony until a courthouse maintenance log shattered his entire alibi, hit subscribe now. Because that one proves the smallest people in the room are often holding the biggest truth.